Well, that didn't necessarily go the way I thought it would. But nonetheless, we're still here, and that means we got to talk about some of the biggest takeaways to come out of the Lions' loss to the Baltimore Ravens. What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride Detroit YouTube channel. I'm Miko, and in today's video, we are once again going to be talking about some of the biggest takeaways and observations to come out of the Lions' loss yesterday to the Baltimore Ravens. And listen, this is going to be one of those videos that's going to be kind of hard to sit through, and it's going to be kind of difficult to talk about because yesterday's game was by far one of the more embarrassing performances that we've seen the Lions put up in recent years. And it's not necessarily because I didn't know that this would be a tough matchup for the Lions when, we previewed the Ravens, offense and defense. Morgan and I did that last week. We made sure to kind of point out that, like, listen, there are some things that this team does both offensively and defensively that could give the Lions fits. And so the fact that this was going to be a difficult matchup definitely didn't catch us by surprise. But there were a number of things that occurred in this game that basically took this from being a competitive game that just didn't go the Lions' way to what we ended up seeing, which was basically nothing short of the Lions essentially just getting their teeth kicked in for 4 quarters straight. Now, before I get into some of the more specific things that I want to take away or that I took away from this game, I want to be kind of clear before we jump into this. I'm not going to get into this video and start calling for people's jobs. I'm not going to specifically criticize certain players and talk as if the progress and the level of play that we've seen this team have through the first 6 weeks of this season were just completely wasted because of one game. This team is better. We've seen them play better week in and week out. Even in the loss to Seattle, they were playing a good game prior to a couple turnovers, basically turning that game over and resulting in a loss for the Lions. So, yes, that game embarrassing. And I'm not going to get on here and try to pretend or try and sugarcoat as if it was nothing short of that. But there are some things that we can take away about why this game was so bad. And there are some things to basically kind of look forward to and understanding that, you know what, this team is still better than what we saw them do just yesterday afternoon. Now, with that said, let's start with one of the biggest takeaways that I have from yesterday's game, and that being the lack of execution on both the offensive and defensive side of the football. Look, one of the best things about this team through the first few weeks is how well they have been able to execute game plans, execute assignments, and just everyone essentially do one of the most basic things that Dan Campbell and his coaching staff ask from their players, which is just doing your job. And in this game, almost from the offset, it very much seemed as though this team was very much just kind of not in sync with what they were supposed to be doing, or basically getting overwhelmed by the moment and not staying true to what their assignments or what they were being asked to do on any given play. And again, I say the offensive and defensive side because, again, if you go back and watch that game, you can see a number of players on both sides of the ball either be confused by something that the Baltimore Ravens offense was doing, or in the case of the Lions offense, being overwhelmed by the fact that the Ravens were able to pressure and kind of throw the offense out of rhythm. In both cases, this team was not able to execute in a way that we're normally used to seeing them. Perfect example being in some of the situations where Lamar Jackson was either able to scramble or just extend plays. There were a number of opportunities where the Lions pass rushers were able to get there. Aiden Hutchinson still went into this game, was still able to produce 6 pressures altogether, but he wasn't able to get home in the way that we had gotten accustomed to seeing him do these last couple weeks. Those simple things of essentially being able to finish a pass rush or simply just holding contain and keeping Lamar Jackson in the middle of that pocket so that he can't roll out and extend plays is just one of the many examples that we can kind of see from this game where one player just doesn't quite do their job, and then it kind of puts another player in a position, whether it be a linebacker or another defensive back, to feel like they have to now come off of their man to be ready to be in run support in the event that Lamar Jackson took off and ran. And then when you go on the offensive side, like I said, sometimes it was really just the offense being rushed or Jared Goff not being able to properly go through his progressions and therefore having to rush a lot of his throws or make some decisions that he just isn't very comfortable doing where he's trying to extend plays and maybe he's fumbling the ball here or there or he's not able to get his feet together to be able to deliver a proper pass. Those things lead to poor execution. And a lot of that credit does go to Baltimore and their ability to keep the Lions from getting into a rhythm and being able to do the things that they want to do at the pace that they want to do them. But when looking at this game, and I'm sure Dan Campbell and his coaching staff is going to look at this tape and notice that and say, you know what? We have to get better in this area. We have to be more disciplined and be able to weather the storms of certain situations. And like Dan actually normally says a lot in his press conferences when they typically lose these games, you have to trust the person next to you that they're going to do their job and that you can just stay focused on your job. And the Lions' inability to do that yesterday afternoon is one of the biggest reasons why this game got out of control as quickly as it did. That leads me into my next big observation from this game. And if you guys know me, I'm not a big person to clamor for big trades or for Brad Holmes to go out here and make these, grand moves in order to shore up a certain portion of this team. I've come to grips with understanding that Brad Holmes is building this team a very specific way and that they're not going to just waste resources for the sake of wasting resources or making a trade just to make a trade if they feel like they can find quality players either through free agency, through practice squads, or whatever the case may be. But after watching yesterday's game and kind of watching the last few weeks, the Lions definitely do need some help when it comes to the cornerback position. And I know a lot of fans have been clamoring for this very thing, especially since Emmanuel Mosley went down with his injury a couple weeks ago. And this only got magnified in this recent matchup with the Ravens because Jerry Jacobs also went down with a knee injury or was downgraded because of a knee injury. And this forced Will Harris to now play outside corner. And like we've talked about, or at least I've talked about plenty of times in the past, Will Harris can be a very serviceable cornerback for your team if you need him to play a couple plays here and there. And he's ideally much better when playing a nickel position rather than having to play that outside corner position. And in this game, he was forced into that outside corner position because the Lions didn't have too many other viable options. And he was one of the players that got picked on a lot. Not probably the worst because that kind of goes to the linebackers, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the Lions' lack of cornerback depth or quality cornerback depth is something that does need to be explored a bit. Cam Sutton has been very good for this team since they've signed him, and I believe that he's at least lived up to the contract that Brad Holmes gave him in this offseason. And Jerry Jacobs, prior to being hurt, was actually playing very well, these last few games. But once you have to go to that next tier of corners, and if we're talking about Will Harris playing outside corner, and you're not very comfortable, elevating a guy like Steven Gilmore or Khalil Dorsey isn't someone that you want starting opposite of Cam Sutton, that cornerback group looks very, very thin. And I'm not going to sit here and pound the table and say that Brad Holmes needs to go out and make a trade, but I do expect this team to probably look more closely at either some free agents or even some practice squad signings to possibly shore up that group because if the defensive line isn't generating enough pressure or getting home to be able to generate sacks, you still need your corners to at least either be able to hold up in coverage or at the very least be able to make tackles and not allow wide receivers to basically be able to make a move and get upfield and, create even more run after catch opportunities. Another big observation that I had from this game, and it once again is on the defensive side of the football, is the poor play by the linebackers. And this is another one of those things that's very uncharacteristic for this Lions defense. Up until this point in the season, the linebacker group has been very, very good. Alex Anzalone has elevated his play and has proven why the Lions chose to bring him back this season. Derek Barnes elevated himself in the offseason and was able to take hold of one of these starting spots. And we know about the Lions drafting Jack Campbell. And while Jack has kind of struggled at different points of the season, he's at least shown at least some good play here and there for us to at least understand why the Lions drafted him. And it gives us hope in the type of player he can be as he starts to develop more. But in this game specifically, the linebackers got picked on quite a bit. According to PFF, Derek Barnes and Jack Campbell were targeted a combined 7 times for over 147 yards. That's a lot when you're talking about your linebacker positions and needing those guys to be able to at least hold up in coverage. Now, I have to say that I'm gonna have to go back and actually break down the tape, which Morgan and I are gonna do later this week to be able to understand what went wrong for the linebackers in coverage. But when you see that stat line, it doesn't give you a lot of faith, and it actually gives a lot of opposing teams a blueprint of how they can potentially look to attack this line's defense. Look, Jack Campbell is someone that I do believe is a better coverage player than some of the other linebackers that the Lions have. But in this game, him giving up 4 receptions for over 40 yards is not a recipe for success. And Derrick Barnes was just as bad, like I said, giving up only 3 receptions for 123 yards. You just can't have that from a guy who clearly has improved his game. But in a matchup like this, the Ravens knew who they wanted to target in the Lions' pass defense, and it was in this case the linebackers. Now, my last takeaway is going to be something that I kind of stated at the beginning of this video, but I'm going to kind of wrap up this video with saying this. As bad as this game was, as terrible as it was, as nauseating as it was to watch, I still believe that this is not the Detroit Lions team that we have watched the last few weeks. I do actually believe that this is just a bad game, that this was just a bad matchup. Dan Campbell had a press conference today and he kind of took the brunt of the criticism, saying that, you know what, he needs to do a better job of getting this team prepared. And I do believe in part that that is true, that there probably could have been some better preparation in terms of whether how they practice or the things that they chose to focus on in practice, whatever the case may be. There could have definitely been a little more attention to detail going into this game. But I'm not leaving the players off the hook either. Because, like I said, with the first point in this video, execution is still the calling card for this team. This team is not stacked with, top 10 players at numerous positions. You have some very good, high quality players at a number of key positions. But for the most part, for this Lions team to find success and for them to be able to get the better of most of their opponents, they've had to execute at a higher clip than the teams that they're playing against. They have to be more locked in on the details, and they have to bring a certain level of intensity to these games week in and week out. And when looking at the Baltimore game, that's just not what happened. But that is a single game in this season. Much like when we saw this team get absolutely ran over in the Carolina game last year and saw them kind of go on a run the rest of the way, I kind of feel like that's going to be the same thing. This is going to be one of those games where they're going to have to sit there and watch the tape and just see themselves getting their butt kicked for 4 quarters. And they're going to have to realize that this is not who we are. They're going to have to make that decision for themselves. And as they go in and attack practice this week, they're going to have to bring in more energy. They're going to have to be better at executing, and they're going to have to be more buying into whatever the game plan is that the coaching staff has in place for them. Fortunately for them, they get an opponent this week on Monday Night Football that hasn't had the best success this year either. But still, this is the type of game where, listen, if you lose to the Ravens, fine. You lost another game on the season. You're still 5-2. You still have your destiny, and everything that you want to achieve this season is all in front of you. But in order to be able to showcase to your fan base, to yourselves, to your team, to your coaches, and everyone to be able to buy into the fact that, you know what, this was just a bad game, you have to come out in the next game and absolutely dominate and showcase the same level of play that you had been showing up until this point. And that's something that I believe this Lions team can do. I still believe Jared Goff is an MVP type of candidate for this year. He had a bad game. I expect him to be better. Aiden Hutchinson didn't have his greatest game, and yes, he was held quite a bit. But even that, Aiden can do better at fighting through those types of plays and drawing penalties by, making it known that he's being held. I expect him to be better in this upcoming week. I expect the offensive line to be better and be more stout and be on the same page. Those are the little things that this team is going to have to do in preparation for this next game that I think they will do, and that's going to be the difference between them winning and losing this upcoming week. So I say all that to say, look, I get it. It was an embarrassing game to watch, and I know a lot of people probably feel like they were served up a slice of humble pie when seeing the Ravens just stomp all over the Lions. But let's keep in mind, this team is 5-2, and they got to 5-2 by playing a winning style of football. This wasn't just a bunch of fourth quarter comebacks or a couple lucky bounces going their way. The Lions got here by beating teams by double digits, by playing sound football. And I believe that they're going to get right back to that this upcoming week against the Raiders. So Those are some of my biggest takeaways. Those are some of my thoughts on the game. Let me know what you guys are thinking. Let me know how you guys are feeling. If you need to vent in the comments, go ahead and vent in the comments. But let's all agree that this is just one game in a season, and this team has to get back on the horse and get back to their winning ways. And that starts by them being able to buy in and execute at a higher level. Also, if you're looking for any more content on the Detroit Lions or any more opinions or observations to come from the game, be sure to check out prideofdetroit.com. You can always find new articles being posted there on a daily basis. Also, if you're new to this channel, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. All of those things help out this channel immensely, and it helps us as we continue to try and grow this platform so that we can engage with more and more Lions fans across YouTube. So once again, I'm Miko. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and I'll catch you in the next one.